screen. So my presentation is about the Egyptian artifacts at the Colorado History Museum. It won't advance the slides. Oh, there it is. For almost 100 years, History Colorado has stored a group of ancient Egyptian objects in their archives. No talking, please. For almost 100 years, History Colorado has stored a group of ancient Egyptian objects in their archives. Most of these artifacts were found at Amarna. Amarna is the modern name for the ancient city built by Akhenaten, who's sometimes called the heretic king. He rejected the worship of old gods of ancient Egypt in favor of a little-known aspect of the sun god called the Aten, shown here with its rays blessing the king. His capital city was called Akhet-Aten, which means the horizon of the Aten. It was built in Middle Egypt about halfway between Cairo and Luxor. The modern name of this site is Amarna. During Akhenaten's reign, the city housed some 50,000 inhabitants. It's also likely the city where King Tutankhamun was born and raised. Shortly after Akhenaten died, his city was abandoned, and the desert sands drifted in, preserving it for modern archaeologists. Although the ancient city at Amarna has been known since the 1700s, excavations did not begin until 1891, when Sir Flinders Petrie dug at the site. He was accompanied by Howard Carter, who would later discover, of course, the tomb of Tutankhamun. They were sponsored by the Egypt Exploration Fund, which had been formed in 1882 by Amelia Edwards. The Egypt Exploration Fund was later called the Egypt Exploration Society, or the EES, as it is known today. Exploration and excavation by both the English and the Germans continued until the First World War. After the war, excavations were started again by the EES in 1921, directed by Eric Peet, and continued in 1922 by Leonard Woolley. Tonight's story is about where the Amarna objects at History Colorado came from. On the left is a map of Amarna, showing the two principal areas excavated by Peet and Woolley. The red arrows point to the main city, and the blue arrows point to the workman's village. On the right is a recent Google Earth satellite view, showing how the site is threatened by the expansion of the villages of El Til and El Hawa. But more about this later. Here's a photo of the 1921 excavation of the main city. It shows workmen clearing the site of an ancient building, digging it out of the sand. The homes and workshops at Akhet-Aten were constructed of adobe bricks made of Nile mud. They were preserved by being buried under the sand, protected from the sun, and the rare rainstorms that sometimes passed through the area. This photograph shows the 1922 excavation at the Workman's Village, which was built in the desert about 2 miles east of the main city. Tens of thousands of objects were unearthed by the EES at Amarna between 1891 and 1936, when excavations stopped due to the Second World War. Excavations did not begin again until 1977, when Barry Kemp began clearing the ancient city's ruins. As each object was unearthed by the EES, it was registered by giving it a unique number, and a drawing of the object was often made on a registration card, as shown on the left. This coal pot, number 22/125, is now at History Colorado. The number 22 signifies it was found in 1922, and it's the 125th object registered that year. Back at the dig house, many of the objects were also photographed. This coal pot is shown by the yellow arrow. History Colorado has their own artifact numbering system, and this coal pot is categorized by them as object 2083.1. Coal was the black paste used to outline the eyes. Made of galena, shown bottom left, it was ground and mixed with oil to serve as a cosmetic eyeliner, providing protection from the glare of the sun and as a medical treatment, since it repelled flies from attacking the eyes. Top left is a coal pot and application stick. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Here's a 1921 photo of some of the EES artifacts in storage at the Amarna Dig House. After registration and storage, the Egyptian Antiquities Organization visited to divide the items between the Egyptian Museum and the Foreign Mission. This system was called partage, and it was intended to keep unique items in Egypt, but also to allow duplicate objects to be exported to the foreign mission's home country. From the EES dig at Amarna, the objects allowed to be exported were sent to London, England. In London, the artifacts were temporarily stored while the excavators, in our case Eric Peat and Leonard Woolley, wrote up their reports. The one on the right is about their 1921 and 22 excavations at Amarna. It's 236 pages long with 64 plates and 176 photographs. As the EES did not have much storage or viewing space, these objects were then distributed as gifts to British and foreign museums. Wealthy donors who sponsored the EES digs were given preference to have the most important items sent to their local museum. Two wealthy supporters of the EES were Lawrence Phipps and his uncle Henry Phipps. Both men were executives of the Carnegie Steel Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They probably attended one of Amelia Edwards' lectures when she toured the U.S. in 1889. Shortly thereafter, both Lawrence and Henry Phipps became life members of the EES, donating up to $100 per year. This is equivalent to a donation of over $3,000 in today's money. The Phipps donations continued from 1890 through 1936. In 1902, Lawrence Phipps retired from his position as vice president of Carnegie Steel and moved to Denver, Colorado. In Denver, Phipps met and married his third wife, Margaret Rogers, the daughter of the former mayor of Denver, Platt Rogers. Phipps was also our U.S. Senator from Colorado between 1919 and 1931. In 1931, he built the Phipps Mansion, which he called Belcaro. Phipps was a supporter of the Denver University and the Colorado Museum of Natural History, shown here in a 1919 photo. It's still part of the building, now called the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, or DMNS. But what about those Amarna artifacts that had traveled from Cairo to the EES in England? Well, Lawrence Phipps arranged for some of them to be sent to Denver in 1922 in exchange for a large donation he had made to the EES in 1920. At that time, the Colorado Museum of Natural History was run by Jesse Figgins, an ornithologist who was mainly interested in acquiring stuffed birds and animals for his museum collection. He wrote the letter on the left, dated December the 9th, 1921, stating that Phipps's donation from the EES had arrived. However, he looked at the packing list and said, "I am very doubtful of the value of this material. It really has scant value for exhibition, and I question if it is very much importance from an archaeologist's standpoint." Figgins also stated he did not want any more Egyptian items sent to his museum. Senator Phipps was, of course, outraged, and he wrote back that, "Your curator of archaeology told me he is very much interested in these items." History has not remembered Figgins well, as he, unlike Lawrence Phipps, was a member of Denver's Ku Klux Klan. The objects from Amarna at the Colorado Museum of Natural History were never put on display, and as shown in the letter on the left, they were transferred by truck to the Colorado State Museum on December the 2nd, 1929. The letter begins, "Delivered to Mr. Martin at the State Museum," and the second last paragraph says the shipment includes all of the items of the Egyptian collection that were donated by Lawrence Phipps. The Colorado State Museum, built in 1915, was located at 214th Street. It housed the Phipps Egyptian collection from 1929 to 1977. This building, by the way, is still standing on 14th Street. Here's the itemized list created when the objects were sent by the EES to Denver in December 1921. There are some very interesting items included here. In 1977, the Phipps Egyptian collection moved from the State Museum to their new home at the History Colorado Center on Broadway. So now you're probably wondering how I became involved with History Colorado's Egyptian objects. Well, it all started with the late Professor Barry Kemp. He was the dig director at Amarna from 1977 until May of 2024, for 47 years. Kemp was the author of many books about Amarna, and his textbook, Ancient Egypt, Anatomy of a Civilization, is pretty much required reading for archaeology students. In the last couple of years, Barry became interested in the stone blocks from the North Palace at Amarna, which had been removed by the EES in the 1920s. Originally, the North Palace was the residence of Akhenaten's secondary wife, Queen Kia, shown top right. It later became the residence of Akhenaten's oldest daughter, Meritaten, pictured bottom left. The photo on the left shows Barry and I expecting the steps leading up to a dais in the North Palace's throne room. The North Palace was divided into two parts, a residential palace on the southern side and a ceremonial palace on its northern side. Here's a reconstruction of the North Palace. This model was designed by archaeologist Kate Spence. Blocks from the ceremonial part of the North Palace are called talatats in Arabic. They were painted with figures of animals. One of them is shown top right. They originally decorated 48 animal mangers at the North Palace. A manger is an animal feeding trough. Barry had mentioned his quest to locate these blocks to a young lady who lives in Canada, Ali Beaubien. She volunteered to track down where these manger blocks are today. This was not an easy task. Some museums had deaccessioned their blocks and transferred them to other places. The photo on the left shows Ali investigating the collection at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. As part of Ali's search, she found a stone trough was listed on the list of objects that had been sent by the EES to the Colorado Natural History Museum as part of the distribution commissioned by Lawrence Phipps. The red arrow points to the first entry in the list, a stone trough. Ali asked me to check with the Denver Museum to see if it was still there. I contacted the collection manager at DMNS and she found it wasn't there, but she also found a letter stating the Phipps collection had been sent instead to History Colorado. I then contacted an archivist at History Colorado, and sure enough, she had a trough from Amarna stored in their collection. So I made an appointment to go look at it. In March of 2024, I visited History Colorado and was shown this small trough, which turned out to be only 10 inches long, obviously too small to be one of the mangers taken from the North Palace. But on seeing this object and a number of others in the Phipps collection, I was surprised to find that almost no information about the objects had been sent with them in 1929 from the Colorado Natural History Museum. The accompanying paperwork simply stated they were a donation from Lawrence Phipps, and they came from either Amarna or Abydos. Thus, History Colorado had no idea what they really had. A side note, in this presentation, I put blue-colored picture frames around photos of objects which are at History Colorado. Objects I show from other museums have black-colored frames. I was also informed that pictures of some of the Phipps collection were posted on History Colorado's website, but their database had very little information about what they were or where these objects had come from. Barry Kemp provided me with a contact at the EES, and she sent me a copy of the registration card for the trough, numbered 21/382, which had been sent to Denver in 1922. It said the trough was found in building number 511, which was later called number 3 Main Street in the Workmen's Village. To make a long story short, I also found out that Dr. Anna Stevens had previously created a database of the EES Amarna registration cards and field notes, and also that the copies of these registration cards and photos were now available online, courtesy of the EES. The spreadsheet Dr. Stevens created shows the year of excavation, the object's registration number, where it was found, what it is made of, the description of the item, where it was published, if there were any photographs taken of the item, and what is recorded on the registration card, and where it was originally distributed to. That's a key item. A gold mine of information. Thank you, Anna. So using this info, I volunteered to find out more about the items in History Colorado's collection. I first emailed History Colorado and got permission to have an archivist pull the items in the Phipps collection, and several of us were allowed to go and view them. We hope to find the EES registration numbers written on each one. Now, let's take an in-depth look at what I found out about the Phipps Egyptian collection. The oldest object is a black-top redware pot, shown in the top picture. It's from Egypt's pre-dynastic period and is about 5,500 years old. Below is a similar pot in pristine condition, now in a private collection in New York. There were two pre-dynastic cemeteries near Abydos, where these pots could have come from, Hu and Abadea. They were excavated by Flinders Petrie between 1898 and 1899. A photo of a grave from Abadea is shown on the right. I contacted Professor Alice Stevenson, a pottery expert at University College London, and she thinks the registration number on the bottom pot, E 1888-92, may refer to a find spot at either Hu or Abadiah, perhaps from Cemetery E, perhaps from grave 1888 and object number 92. Or the number could be an acquisition number previously inscribed by another museum or a private collector. Petrie classified this pot as a type 18B pot. Although the blacktop redware pot probably came from Abydos, all of the other 50 or so objects at History Colorado seem to have been found at Amarna. Let's start examining the Amarna objects in the collection by looking at where each object was found. Here's the location of a building known as the River Temple. An important person entering Akhenaten City from the south may have first arrived at the southern gateway to the city, at a place misnamed by the excavators the River Temple. The building was later shown to be a private residence of a chief of works, who lived some 50 years after Akhenaten during the reign of King Ramses II. He was probably living at Amarna to help disassemble and recycle the stone buildings scattered around the city. However, some of the River Temple buildings were much older, as the site lay at the beginning of an important road to the alabaster stone quarries at Hatnub, which had been in use for at least 1,000 years before. So parts of the building dated back to the reign of Akhenaten and even earlier. History Colorado has this partial Talatat block found at the River Temple, showing a supplicant bowing before the king. There are many scenes of people bowing before Akhenaten, like the drawing on the left from the Amarna tomb of Meribay II, Akhenaten's treasurer. These scenes are unique to the Amarna period. The ESS registration number for this block is 22/404, and you can still see the number written in ink on the side of the block. It's cataloged at History Colorado as their object number 2199.1. Another exciting find at History Colorado from the River Temple is this piece of a blue war crown, top left, from a statue of a king. It's very similar to the blue war crown called the Kepresh in ancient Egyptian on statues of Tutankhamun, shown bottom left. Right is the painted top of a box found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It also shows the king wearing the Kepresh crown. It's likely that History Colorado's crown piece came from either a statue of Akhenaten or Tutankhamun. Here's the location of the south suburb. Let's assume that our visitor left the River Temple. He paid a visit to the house of Akhenaten's southern vizier, Nakpa-Aten, who lived nearby in the south suburb. His large two-story mansion, now called Building K50.1, had 28 rooms on its ground floor. The top left photo shows the remains of his house, as seen in 2005. Bottom left is a drawing from Police Chief Mayhew's tomb, showing him greeting Nakpa-Aten. Right is a photo of Nakpa-Aten from that tomb. Arriving at the vizier's front door, hieroglyphs on the door jamb named its owner Nakpa-Aten, and his titles: hereditary prince, seal bearer, count, overseer of the city, overseer of works, and vizier. Top left is the entry into Nakpa-Aten's house, with the original door jamb location outlined in blue. Top right is a block at History Colorado that's part of that door jamb. It says, "Beloved of the Lord of the Two Lands." Shown below are all the pieces of the door jamb and their translation by our local Josh Medor. And I'll quote what he came up with. Nakpa-Aten, vizier, beloved of the Lord of the Two Lands, overseer of works and favorite official of the people. Akhenaten, great in his lifetime, his God made mankind build this city. Once escorted inside Nakpa-Aten's home, you entered a long hall shown by the red arrows, and afterwards would have been allowed in to see the vizier in his central reception room, yellow arrow, seated on a divan, which I have colored green. Here's a reconstruction of the reception room inside Nakpa-Aten's house. I've even put a seated scribe on his divan. Nakpa-Aten's tomb at Amarna was only partially constructed before the city was abandoned. It's not known where he was ultimately buried. North of the south suburb in the main city is the central part of Akhenaten. It was the city's religious and political hub, filled with government buildings. An ancient text from Thebes describes the duties of the vizier. It mentions the vizier had to meet with the king and his officials on a daily basis. The king's great palace, colored green, is located on the west side of the Royal Road, opposite the rest of the city center. Access to the palace was controlled by a bridge over the Royal Road, red arrow, which had a building, colored blue, at the eastern end that functioned as a sort of gatehouse controlling access into the great palace. Modern excavators have called this the King's House, but Barry Kemp thought it should be more properly called the Office of the Vizier, who was, of course, Nakpa Aten. Here's a modern view of the King's House, covered in sand. Perhaps the excavators were confused, since this vizier's office contained a throne room, but it would make sense if the king met here daily with his officials. The king probably would not have wanted to have a large number of officials and emissaries coming and going in his royal palace, but may have instead preferred to meet with them at the vizier's office. One of the rooms beside the throne room was decorated with a scene of two of Akhenaten's daughters, top right. It's now in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. Below is a reconstruction of the dais in the throne room. Here, important officials probably met with the king seated on his dais, with Nakpa Aten standing nearby. Just south of the city center was the main city, which had residential houses and workshops. After meeting the vizier, perhaps the next person to visit was Ra-Nefer. He lived in the main city at house N49.18, red arrow on the plan, at the corner of streets A and C. It was excavated by the EES in 1921. Ra-Nefer's house had many workshops and buildings attached to it. Some of the workshops were found to contain pottery, glass, and trial pieces of statuary. There's even a full-size reconstruction of Ra-Nefer's two-story house, shown bottom left, at the Amarna Visitor Center. An inscription on painted plaster at the entry to Ra-Nefer's house gave his name and titles: Master of Horses, Chief Groom of His Majesty, and Overseer of the King's entire stables. So Ra-Nefer could have supplied our visitor with a chariot and driver to take them around the city. The drawing on the top left shows attendants holding a chariot and waiting for a passenger. It's from the tomb of Police Chief Mayhew. Bottom right is one of the chariots found in King Tut's tomb. The inscription shown on the left is interesting, since below Ra-Nefer's name is the epithet Ma-Heru, which means deceased. So that inscription was added to the wall after Ra-Nefer died. History Colorado has an unfinished statue of a monkey holding a baby. This might help you visualize where the mother and baby's heads were. It was found in Street A, just beside Ra-Nefer's house. It was probably dropped when clearing out one of the workshops attached to the house. There were two kinds of monkeys known to the ancient Egyptians: the green monkey, imported from Punt on the southern coast of the Red Sea, and the Barbary monkey, imported from the Barbary coast of Tunisia. However, it's also possible, if the statue was finished, it might have depicted baboons and not monkeys. Baboons were sacred animals thought to be the earthly manifestation of the god Thoth, the Egyptian god of writing. The statue on the right is from Madrid Museum, shows a baboon holding a baby. Then there was also a ferocious baboon god named Babi, as seen on the left, from a painting in the wall of Tutankhamun's burial chamber. The next stop may have been the Kom El Nana. Kom El Nana is the modern name of a temple and ceremonial center dedicated to Nefertiti. She was the chief wife of the living god Akhenaten, and therefore herself was semi-divine. Kom El Nana was a walled compound that had a central raised shrine dedicated to the Aten. Egyptologists call this a sunshade, a platform open to the sun where the Aten could be worshipped. At History Colorado, there's some offering bowls, bottom right, used by ordinary citizens to offer items like nuts and incense to the god. It's likely these came from the Kom El Nana, as the EES report stated that most offering bowls found at Amarna were from there. More about these bowls in a few minutes. At the southernmost part of Amarna was the Meru Aten. The Meru Aten was a huge walled-off area with two lakes and various buildings and shrines. Meru Aten means the viewing place of the Aten. The red arrows point to the main shrine at the temple complex. Could have been the next stop of our visitor touring the south. The site was originally dedicated to Akhenaten's secondary wife Kia, a nickname that means little monkey in ancient Egyptian. Kia is shown bottom right making an offering on a block found at the Meru Aten. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. For whatever reason, Kia's name was carved over, and the Meru Aten was rededicated to Akhenaten's oldest daughter, Meritaten. About Akhenaten's 16th regnal year, Meritaten married Smenkhare, who was made co-regent king. It was not to last, however, as Smenkhare probably died about a year later, just before Akhenaten himself died. History Colorado has part of a limestone Talatat block, shown above, from the main shrine at the Meru Aten, which shows offerings of geese, bread, a cow, and vegetables. Beautiful painted pavements were also found in the Meru Aten. But the site of the Meru Aten has unfortunately been built over and completely destroyed by the village of El Hawa. While at the south end of the city, our visitor could have taken a side trip to the Workman's Village. Workman's Village is reached by a road running about 2 miles into the desert. It was constructed just in front of the cliffside hills where many of the nobles built their tombs. It's also near the mouth of the Wadi where the Amarna royal tomb was constructed. A wadi is a small dry valley, previously carved out of the hills by a rushing stream. The Workman's Village and its surrounding buildings and chapels yielded a lot of artifacts when they were excavated by the EES in 1921 and 22. Here's a plan of the walled village drawn by architect Francis Newton. I've shaded house number 3 on Main Street in blue and the larger supervisor's house, bottom right, in orange. Several of the objects at History Colorado were found at number 3 Main Street. There was only a single access gate shown at the bottom into the village, and it was probably guarded by a policeman. Here's a reconstruction I've done of one of the Workman's Village houses, number 5 Main Street, based on its written description in Pete and Woolley's 1922 report. The house had stairs to the roof in the front courtyard. Pete and Woolley call this a Type B house. A few of the buildings in the Workman's Village had a second story, but most had a flat rooftop activity area, probably covered by a canopy for shade. Left is an ancient model of a 2-story ancient Egyptian house, and right is a reconstruction of a Type B single-story house with its shaded canopy on its roof. The other stair configuration was called a Type A house, where stairs to the roof go up from the kitchen. Most of the houses in the village were built to this standard plan. Here's a photo of the ruins of a Type A house at number 8 Gate Street, which had stairs from the kitchen to the roof, shown by the yellow arrow. This photo was taken when the house was re-excavated in 1985. The red arrow points to a grain-grinding quernstone found in the kitchen. The walls of most homes at Amarna were built of mud brick. They were smoothed over with white plaster, using brushes like these at History Colorado, which were discovered bound together. Traces of white plaster still remain on them to this day, although as you can see they're a bit worse for wear compared to their 1922 photo. These brushes were found at number 11 Gate Street. The whitewashed walls rapidly deteriorated after the city was abandoned. Traces of whitewashed plaster were found on some of the walls, and at number 3 Main Street were the remains of 2 images of the god Bes. Bes was the god of music, merrymaking, and childbirth. His image was often painted on the walls of children's bedrooms. A painted pillar found at number 9 Main Street, shown on the right, still had decoration on it. The pillar would have supported a second story. Many tools were found in the Workman's Village, including the wooden mallet shown on the left. It was found at number 8 Main Street, and although it was part of the Phipps Egyptian collection sent to Denver, it's currently at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I'll discuss why it's still at the DMNS in a few minutes. The next 3 items to the right, the wooden top of a broken awl or chisel, the handle of a saw, and the handle of an axe, are all at History Colorado. They were found in the Workman's Village at number 11, number 12, and number 8 Main Street. The 3-ply rope shown below was discovered at number 3 Main Street. It's also at History Colorado. Parts of tomb models were discovered in the Workman's Village. For example, this model boat rudder was found at number 12 Main Street. It's at History Colorado. The rudder is from a model boat similar to the one shown below, now at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The object shown at the top is a model boat oar at History Colorado, found at number 12 Long Wall Street, and it's similar to the one shown below on the boat at the Metropolitan Museum. In the center is a top view of a hull of a model boat at History Colorado. On the right is its EES registration card, which shows a side view of the object. It was found at number 11 Main Street. The next few slides are about spinning and weaving. Ancient Egyptians made linen cloth from the flax plant. Flax is harvested and then threshed, as shown bottom center, to remove the seed heads. The stalks of these flax are then soaked in water for a few days, a process called retting. The soaking releases long fibers, which are kept wet during spinning by pulling them through a loop in a spinning bowl, a shallow bowl filled with water, seen at bottom left, and shown by the blue arrows in the scene above from a tomb at El Bersha. The wet flax fibers are then tied to the end of a spindle and then spun to twist them together on an assembled drop spindle, like this one at History Colorado. The spindle even has the remnants of linen threads clinging to its end. Drop spinning is also shown by red arrows in Tanuti Hotep's tomb scene. This creates a twisted single-ply thread. Drop spindles are assembled from spindle sticks, like those in the top left photo, and whorls, seen bottom left. The whorl adds weight to the drop spindle, making it easier to keep it spinning. An assembled drop spindle is shown on the right. These spindle sticks, whorls, and a few complete drop spindles were all registered together by the EES as Object 21/264, and they're in the Phipps collection at History Colorado. All of these objects were found at number 3 Main Street, along with the remains of a vertical loom. Vertical looms are secured top and bottom, and in the case of number 3 Main Street, the bottom was placed in stone sockets set in the floor of the courtyard. The vertical threads of the loom, called the warp, were separated with a stick called a shed stick to allow the horizontal threads, called the weft, to be weaved through every other alternate warp thread. The threads were then pressed down with a beating stick to get a tight weave. Then the shed stick was moved back to the start, weaving the next row by putting it through opposite alternating warp threads, and the process was repeated again and again and again. The sticks shown here, found at number 7 Main Street, may be shed sticks, or they may have been used to beat down each row of the weft to get a tightly woven fabric. The vertical warp threads are held tight via the use of warp weights, blue arrow on the left drawing. The Phipps collection has 2 warp weights, shown on the right. The upper warp weight still has several of the linen warp threads attached, shown by the yellow arrow. It was found in the forecourt of the House of Raneffer, the master of horses and chariots, the same Raneffer where the unfinished statue of the monkey was found, which I showed previously. The bottom warp weight was simply recorded as being found somewhere in the workman's village. It was originally sent by the EES to the Philadelphia Commercial Museum and then somehow found its way to Denver. Top center is a finished textile, Tutankhamun's headscarf, which was found in his tomb. It's on display at the Metropolitan Museum. Made of fine single-strand linen thread called royal linen, it was soft and supple, the finest cloth woven in ancient Egypt. Garments woven from royal linen were semi-transparent, as seen on the torso statue of Nefertiti, left, now at the Louvre, and right on the outer robe worn by Senefer, mayor of Thebes, during the reign of Akhenaten's great-grandfather, Amenhotep II. The black and white photos are a pair of adult sandals and a child's sandal, both found in House O49.23 in the main city. They were sent as part of the Phipps collection, and History Colorado issued their own registration numbers on these objects. You can still see the registration number, 2103, inscribed on the child's sandal. However, they're currently at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and are cataloged by their own registration number, A504. You can see this additional number on the child's sandal. I mentioned this to the History Colorado Collections curator, and she searched back through the records and found that these sandals had been loaned to the DMNS in early 1965. And then instead of being returned to History Colorado, they were exchanged for other artifacts later that same year. So I think it's likely the other items missing from the original Phipps collection list were traded to other museums, like the DMNS. It will take further research to try to track down where these objects may have gone. Here's some personal grooming and cosmetic items. The coal pot I showed at the beginning of my talk was found in the living room at number 10 Main Street, and the hair comb was found in the living room at number 8 Main Street. They're both at History Colorado. The highly polished hand mirror made of bronze bottom left was found by the EES at Amarna. It's now in the Brooklyn Museum. And on the bottom right is a set of tweezers, also found at Amarna. It's now in the Art Institute of Chicago. On the right is a perfume jar depicting an Amarna princess. It's at the Metropolitan Museum. The perfume jar is in the shape of the Hess hieroglyph, meaning praise. Perfumed libations were often poured out from these jars in temple ceremonies, as shown on the left. Now, what about Amarna pottery? As mentioned previously, many shallow offering bowls were found at the Carmel Nana. More were even found at the Great Aten Temple. Some have traces of burned incense, while others seem to have contained food or spices. The offering bowl, bottom left, was found in a foundation deposit at Hatshepsut's temple in Deir el-Bahri. It still even contained its offering berries. As seen on the right, there are many variations on this simple shape of bowl that's found at Amarna. In a workshop at M50.14 in the main city, the pot on the left was discovered. It has a red slip glaze fired on its exterior, and it was made in two parts, as can be seen by the seam around the center, yellow arrow. A kiln was used to fire ceramic pots found in the Workman's Village at number 13 West Street. Fired pots, like this one in the History Colorado collection, were often used to make bread. Bottom right is a similar shaped pot, yellow arrow, found in situ by the EES at Amarna. Bread made for offerings, however, was often conical in shape, as shown by the drawing on the left from Senusret I Whitechapel. Drawing on the right, sorry. The conical bread pots shown on the left were found in the Workman's Village. As Barry Kemp was showing me around Amarna, I noticed a small pot shard sticking out of the sand. Barry hardly looked at it and said, "It's a bread mold." Later, I questioned how he could identify such a small shard from more than 6 feet away. "That's easy," he said. We were standing in the middle of Amarna's bakery. A glass kiln was also found at M50.14. It was investigated by Dr. Anna Hodkinson and Miriam Bertram, who studied glassmaking at Amarna. Its location is shown top left. Some of the objects found there are shown top right. Craftsmen at Amarna were famous for producing amazing works in glass, like this tilapia fish, now in the British Museum. I previously mentioned that the Workman's Village was in the desert several miles from the source of water along the Nile. Water had to be transported to the village in amphora carried by donkeys. Remains of these amphoras show they had been manufactured in the Levant and brought to Egypt. This may be because the Egyptians usually lived so close to the Nile that they, unlike the people living in the Levant, did not usually have to regularly transport large amounts of water across dry land. The amphoras filled with water were staged at a water storage spot near the village. Amphoras are called zir in Arabic, so this spot became known as the zir area. Individuals came to this spot to fill smaller pots with water, which were taken and dispensed into water storage jars in their homes and workshops. This water jar, decorated in the blue painted Amarna-ware style, is in the Phipps collection. It was found beside the Workman's Village in a large chapel, building number 525 by the excavators. The chapel's reconstruction is shown bottom right. Originally, the blue water jar would have had a lid, like the one pictured on the right, which is at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, but the one at History Colorado has lost its lid. However, there is a similar jar lid in the Phipps collection, as shown on the left. It's made of limestone. Shown above are clay ring molds in the Phipps collection, which have had their faience rings removed. Faience is a form of glass paste that becomes very hard ceramic after firing, usually with a shiny surface. It was commonly used for rings and amulets. Below left is a mold which has been prepared for firing by sealing the faience frit inside the mold and piercing the mold with vent holes which draw off the moisture during firing. But the ring does not seem to have been extracted from the mold. Perhaps the mold cracked during firing? The faience rings shown in bottom center are at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. This faience ring bezel, found on the right, was found at Amarna, and it's inscribed Neb Keperu Ra, King Tut's throne name. Similar rings with Tut's name were found at the Workman's Village. This necklace is in the Phipps collection. It appears to be made of turquoise with teardrop and cornflower pendants of various colored stones. The cornflower was the symbol of life and fertility and figured prominently in Amarna design motifs. Gates and doors to houses were secured with wooden door bolts, like the one pictured here. They work just like modern deadbolts do today. This door bolt was found at number 4 Main Street. It's in the Phipps collection. The door bolt was also the symbol for the hieroglyphic letter Z, or Z, as they say in England. Wooden items from ancient Egypt are very rare, as most tombs and buildings were located fairly close to the Nile, and termites found these items and devoured wood. As mentioned previously, however, the Workman's Village was located several miles from the Nile on dry desert sands. No termites, and thus wood from here is well preserved. I've not yet identified the wooden object above in the Phipps collection. It's very similar to the artifact shown below, which was found at number 12 Gate Street, and is now in the Liverpool Museum. The EES excavators and the Liverpool Museum simply listed it as a wooden object. Both objects have a small wooden pin inserted inside, which appears to have had a knob at the end to push and pull the pin in and out. I have no idea what it might have been used for. The search continues. I'll finish up by looking at furniture discovered at Amarna. The bed shown top left was found by the EES team in 1921, upside down and just outside the courtyard gate at number 3 Main Street. It's yet another example of something dropped during a hurried exit. The bed frame was made of wood with reed slats. Underneath was a straw mattress stuffed inside a linen duvet. Unfortunately, the entire bed disintegrated as the excavators were trying to lift it out of the sand. One of Tutankhamun's beds is shown top right. It's of a similar design. Below right is a model bed made of pottery, which was found at house N4921 in the main city. At the foot of the model bed is a headdress, yellow arrow. Bottom left is a headdress from Tutankhamun's tomb. The final two items I'd like to show from the Phipps collection are the wooden cone-shaped object left and center and the long slotted piece of worked wood on the right. The cone was found at number 22 West Street in the bedroom. It's named on the EES distribution list as a top, but it's probably not a child's toy, as it's not uniform in shape and would not spin very well. It may be part of an unfinished finial made to cap a piece of furniture. That's just my best guess, but it may be something else. The wooden object on the right is probably a table or chair leg, slotted to be attached at the top and cut to a slope to rest on the floor at an angle. The excavators simply referred to it as a wooden object and did not speculate as to its purpose. It does show termite damage, so it probably came from a building in the city close to the Nile. The EES notes did not mention where it was found, and it does not have a registration number written on it. There are still unexcavated parts of Amarna which may yet yield other treasures. An unexcavated sculptor's workshop has been found, and there are plans to excavate this site. Who knows? Perhaps another find like the bust of Nefertiti is waiting to be discovered? But as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, many of these areas are threatened by the expansion of the 2 villages that surround the city. The Amarna Project's excavation team mentioned a plan to fence off the entire archaeological site to prevent further incursion. But of course, they will need further funds to accomplish this work. The Denver-based Amarna Research Foundation has for the past 30 years supported work done by the Amarna Project, as well as other work at Saqqara. Contributions to preserve this area are tax-deductible if made through the Amarna Research Foundation. I hope you will consider joining us to preserve this unique place. So, History Colorado now has a lot more information about what's in the Phipps collection of Egyptian artifacts than before I started. I hope it will not be another 100 years before the next person looks at these objects. Thanks for watching my presentation, and thanks for helping support work at Amarna.